Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Kevin O'Leary, where we break down complex financial and geopolitical stories into insights you can actually understand. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Vladimir Putin's Ukrainian adventure is dragging Russia not only into military losses, but into a full-blown demographic catastrophe, and I'm watching it unfold in real time. Russia is experiencing an invasion stretching from the Ural Mountains to Siberia, from Moscow to St. Petersburg. Moscow's famous Red Square has literally transformed into a dance floor for Indian workers. Once Russian marches played under Lenin's statue, now Bollywood tunes echo through the streets. Russian neighborhoods are being taken over by Indians walking around with loudspeakers, shouting and calling out, and this isn't some isolated incident. This is systematic replacement. It all started with the Kremlin's fast-tracked immigration policy, setting a quota of 72,000 workers from India for 2025 alone. While Russian men are dying on the front lines right now, a massive airlift is operating between New Delhi and Moscow to fill the vacancies they're leaving behind at workbenches, steering wheels, and construction sites. The images on the ground bring this nightmare to life. The lines forming in front of migrant offices and employment centers in Moscow look exactly like the bread lines during the Soviet era. Except this time, it's not Russians waiting. It's tens of thousands of Indians. This influx has already been absorbed into the workforce. The dill that defined Russian cuisine has given way to garam masala and curry rising from every corner. The most striking aspect of this human trafficking operation is its institutional backing. Following Putin's visit to India, Russia's largest financial institution, Sberbank, went beyond banking activities and essentially transformed into a state-backed human resources agency. The bank's priority is no longer ruble transfers, but financing and organizing a regular flow of labor from India to Moscow. Future projections take this situation from crisis to existential catastrophe. Russian First Deputy Prime Minister Denis Manturov is saying they're ready to accept an unlimited number of workers. The planned addition of 40,000 Indian workers by 2026 and the Ural Chamber of Commerce's alarming prediction that they need 1 million Indian workers shows that Russia is throwing its doors wide open. The gloomy atmosphere in St. Petersburg, the subject of Dostoevsky's novels, is taking on a completely different cultural texture right before our eyes. Indian workers here are being offered approximately 100,000 rubles, which is considered high by Russian standards. This income corresponds to over $1,200. An average Russian worker earns a maximum of 60,000 rubles per month. To see how this income gap is crushing Russian workers, just watch this. Testimony: go to the special operation to work. Well, many did just that, by the way. And now I see the Indians are working a full week. I realize they're paid peanuts and we're just being pushed out to save money. Everywhere from the industrial cities of the Ural region to the suburbs of Moscow is drowning under this demographic wave. When you ride the Moscow metro now, you see South Asian faces more than Slavic ones. This transformation isn't happening in silent acceptance. It's creating a violent wave of friction at the grassroots level. Those famous patriotic Russians sitting at their keyboards have been raving about India and Modi on Telegram channels and Twitter for months, chanting slogans like BRICS Brotherhood and shoulder to shoulder against Western imperialism, sanctifying the alliance forged with Asia. But when those virtual brothers descended onto the streets of Moscow and began filling Russian jobs and neighborhoods, that digital love ended abruptly, giving way to street fights and open hostility. If the wave of labor coming from India is a demographic leak, relations with China represent the complete collapse of the dam. Putin handed over Russia's keys to Beijing under the guise of unlimited friendship to survive Western sanctions. Russia's visa-free entry for Chinese citizens has effectively eliminated border controls. This move is a result of the Kremlin's economic desperation, needing Chinese tourists for foreign currency inflows. Russia has turned St. Petersburg's famous Nevsky Prospect into a veritable Chinese marketplace. Now, instead of Russian whispers in front of the Winter Palace or in the corridors of the Hermitage Museum, the echoes of Chinese tour guides' megaphones dominate. Images from the field show just how devastating this transformation has become. The huge Chinese groups walking the streets of St. Petersburg look like property owners inspecting the city, rather than tourists visiting. These crowds are encroaching on the daily living space of Russian shopkeepers and citizens. Places once frequented by the Russian aristocracy and intelligentsia are now under the control of masses driven by the power of the yuan. Putin has fallen into the position of a merchant selling Russia's cultural heritage for cash. Alongside Chinese tourists, large numbers of Chinese workers in Russia are now the new normal. The visibility and concentration of Chinese people has increased dramatically in cities like Vladivostok, Khabarovsk, and Blaves. The darkest side of this relationship is emerging in the Far East in Vladivostok. In this city, once known as ruler of the East, Russian citizens are being treated as second-class citizens in their own land. A video leaked on social media shows Chinese students beating a Russian cleaner, and the footage is causing an uproar. Social media posts by local Russian citizens sum up the horror in one ominous sentence. Putin signed a decree granting Chinese citizens visa-free entry to Russia, but technically, does the border still exist? Will they control their future assets in Siberia? This anxiety isn't unfounded. We're witnessing images of how Russia's natural resources are being consumed and hearing citizens' cries of despair. The resource monster China, led by the Communist Party, is consuming Siberia. They're cutting down these birch trees, taking the red cedar, the centuries-old pines. According to reports from Ukraine's Foreign Intelligence Service to finance its war machine in Ukraine, the Putin regime is effectively handing over control of the country's richest lands, that vast geography comprising approximately 40% of Russia's total area, to Beijing. But there's an even more dystopian layer to this story. North Korea. Putin has become dependent not only on China's economic power, but also on the slave labor of the world's most isolated regime. The deployment of 50,000 North Korean workers to Russia is one of the largest state-sponsored human trafficking operations in modern history. These people aren't working as laborers on Russian construction sites. They're functioning as biological robots hired by the regime. 18-hour workdays, only 2 days off per month, and near zero job security. While Putin declares war on Western values, he's transformed his own country into a modern version of Stalinist labor camps. Luxury housing projects in St. Petersburg and Moscow are being built not by Russian engineers, but by this shadow army. The existence of a 5,000-strong construction army unit proves that Russia's technical capacity has collapsed. Even more alarming, according to Ukrainian intelligence reports, North Korean workers are being assigned to factories in Russia for drone production. The Russian defense industry, that vaunted invincible complex, is now entrusted to Kim Jong-un's workers. This is tearing apart the fabric of Russian society. On one side are the Chinese who have money and are buying up the city. On the other are the North Koreans working in misery and sometimes rebelling. Ukrainian official Anton Gashchenko asked the obvious question at this point: how many of them will actually stay on construction sites, and how many will be used on the front lines? The answer isn't hidden in the dark corridors of the Kremlin. It's clearly evident in Russia's past practices. First, they brought in Central Asians, then Cubans, then Nepoes. The promise is always the same: high-paying construction work. But here's where it gets absolutely sinister, and you need to understand this mechanism because it's happening right now. The scenario plays out as predictably as a horror movie. The workers arrive in Moscow, their passports are confiscated, and they're presented with papers written in Cyrillic, of which they understand not a single word. Those papers, which they're made to sign under the pretext of just a procedure or construction insurance, are actually their death warrants. The moment they sign, their status changes from worker to contract soldier, and they find themselves in the killing fields of Ukraine with Kalashnikovs in their hands. The evidence coming from the field hits us in the face with this horrific reality. Look at the helplessness of this Indian man as he describes the horror he experienced. I worked for 2 days, and on the third day they gave me the coordinates. I saw Ukrainian soldiers. I'm not Russian. I'm not Russian. I just want to go home and forget about these things. These words belong not to a volunteer fighting for the Russian world, but to a civilian who came hoping to earn a few $100s and became a victim of a war crime. This model isn't limited to uneducated workers. The system is so greedy, it swallows up anyone it catches. The story of Iranian Arash Darvandi proves how the legal system in Russia has turned into a human hunt. Darvandi, a petroleum engineer and photographer, was detained during a routine police check in St. Petersburg, where he'd arrived on a tourist visa, and he was presented with that terrible dilemma, either prison or the front line. Darvandi's testimony also exposes the racist caste system within the Russian army. In training camps, Russian soldiers and foreigners are strictly separated. Africans, Middle Easterners, Iranians, Latin Americans are kept in separate barracks, not properly trained, and sent to the front without even learning how to use weapons, because in the eyes of Russian commanders, they're not soldiers, they're expendables. The most painful and humiliating part for the Russian people is the financial aspect. Putin is spending his own people's livelihood on this imported army. Russia is paying North Korean soldiers approximately $2,000 per person per month. This money is a lifeline of $500 million a year for the North Korean regime. While a Russian struggles to earn an average of $600 a month, Putin pays an allied soldier 3 times the salary of his own citizen. Now think about this for a second. How long can a society function when foreigners are valued more than its own citizens? Looking at the big picture, the threat Russia faces isn't just an influx of migrants from outside, but the inevitable result of a system rotting from within. The Central Asian republics, which the Kremlin has viewed as its backyard and looked down upon for years, have now become actors holding Russia's fate in their hands. Russia is systematically targeting Central Asian migrants to compensate for its losses on the front lines. They're being offered a death sentence in exchange for the promise of citizenship. This strategy has created a terrible backlash. Every Tajik, Uzbek, or Kyrgyz worker sent to the front creates an unfillable void in Moscow's service sector, construction, and cleaning jobs. Putin is sacrificing the economy to continue the war. Inhumane treatment and forced conscription practices at places like the Sakharovo Detention Center are causing a massive buildup of anger among the Central Asian diaspora. This anger isn't just silent discontent. It's the seed of a potential mutiny. There are millions of angry, marginalized people within Russia who've been forced into military training. Ironically, Russia's xenophobic policies and deteriorating economy are causing even migrants to flee Russia. The devaluation of the ruble and police pressure are pushing Central Asian workers to other routes to Europe or other developing regions of Asia. But the real strategic checkmate is hidden in the cold, cruel mathematics of demographics. Russia is biologically dying out. Birth rates have fallen to their lowest level in 200 years. This data represents the greatest catastrophe that can befall a state. Even during the Napoleonic Wars, World War I, or the darkest days of World War II, Russia's demographic future wasn't this bleak. Putin's war hasn't only wiped out the current generation on the front lines, but also the unborn generations. There is no future because the children who will build it aren't being born. The Kremlin has classified the data as a state secret to hide this reality. But obfuscating the numbers doesn't change what's happening. As the Russian ethnic population rapidly declines, it's being replaced by immigrants from Asia. This is precisely what Putin claims to want to prevent, the loss of Russia's Russian identity. Strategically, this threatens the integrity of Russia as a federation. In a scenario where central authority weakens, the army melts away, and the population undergoes demographic change. It becomes impossible for Moscow to hold on to Siberia, the Caucasus, or the Far East. The increase in the Chinese population in regions bordering China is causing these regions to effectively shift to Beijing's sphere of influence. This isn't a loss of territory, it's a transfer of power. While Putin sought to expand the empire, he's lost demographic control of the core territories he already held. The picture before us holds a tragedy far deeper than the military defeat of a superpower. Vladimir Putin wanted to go down in history as a leader who gained territory like Peter the Great. However, his legacy will be that of a leader who turned Russia into a demographic and economic colony of Asia. This is a domino effect playing out in real time. The war is wiping out the productive male population. The resulting void is being filled by opening doors to Asia to prevent the economy from collapsing. And the result, Indian youths dancing in Red Square, Chinese tourists buying up St. Petersburg, and North Korean slaves waiting for orders on construction sites. Putin's sovereign Russia is now just a facade. Inside, it's China's gas station, India's labor backyard, and North Korea's construction camp. Those Bollywood tunes echoing in Moscow aren't actually a celebration. They're the lament of Russia's silent surrender without a shot being fired. We've said there's no safe place in this world anymore. Now we must add, there's no place for Russians in Russia. So here's what I want you to consider. If a nuclear superpower can lose its identity this quickly through demographic replacement, what does that mean for the future of nation-states in general? If you found this breakdown insightful, subscribe to John Edward, hit the bell icon, and share this video because understanding the intersection of money, power, and strategy is more important today than ever. Stay informed, stay prepared, and we'll continue uncovering the moves shaping our